and welcome to this week's YouTube video. Every 4 weeks I do a Procreate video. I try and make my artwork as close to my oil paintings that you'll also find on my channel as I can. I've been asked by a number of you to do a tutorial showing how to paint a loose landscape in Procreate. So this is what I am going to show you this week, how I painted this landscape in Procreate. I've been looking for a suitable landscape to paint for a while and couldn't find anything. In the end, I generated one in Adobe Firefly using generative AI. A word of caution if you do this, watch out for dodgy perspective. This photo had issues with the barn being incorrect, so I had to fix that first before I could use it. If you are interested in the prompt I used, it was something like barn in field with horse in foreground in morning light. The artwork took me 6 hours to do, so it is not possible to show you brushstroke by brushstroke, but I will explain the principle of how to do this, so that if you want to have a go at a loose landscape yourself, you will know how to do it. Before I show you the time-lapse video, a word about the brushes that you will need. I used a combination of brushes I had bought and also ones in Procreate. The ones I had bought I got from Tip Top Brushes. I bought their Pro Oil painting set, but I also have some of their free brushes that I picked up in 2018 and 2019. I'll put a link to some of their free brushes in the video description if you want to try them out first before buying. The brushes I used in Procreate were the wet acrylic, flat brush and oil paint brush. The brushes I used from the Pro Oil paint set were feathered bristle, fine wet liner and misty airbrush, and from their 2018 free set I used the True Oil. I think a similar one may be the Master Oil in their 2019 free set, but notice how the brushes that I am using all make different marks. That is very important because one brush alone will not give me the effect that I want. Let's have a look at the time-lapse video and I'll talk about what I am doing as I am going along. For sheer speed, I am going to drop my photo straight into Procreate and draw around it to give me my object placements. If you wish to practice your drawing, doing it this way is not going to help you get better. So just bear in mind if you want to work on your drawing, then it is best not to trace. I have put my drawing on a separate layer. This layer will be my top layer and I will use it to check my drawing throughout the painting. I am also using the photo that I amended so that the perspective is correct. I use 2-point perspective to sort this issue. If you want to know more about perspective, then have a look at this video on my channel. I am going to start with a block-in using the wet acrylic brush at about 70% opacity. When doing a block-in, it is important to do it in a logical order because I am going to be working mainly on one layer. I am trying to mimic as closely as possible how I would paint this in oils. The logical order I would paint this in is background, midground and then foreground. That's it for the wet acrylic when I've done my block-in. It's only useful for the block-in stage. I will now start adding layers of paint of various transparencies over the whole painting. It is very important to understand that just because this style looks loose and painterly does not mean it is done quickly without thought and consideration. I am constantly thinking about the sort of marks I want to make, the opacity of my paint and my brush selection. Every stroke that I lay is considered, and to get the effect I want, I have to work hard to build up multiple layers of paint marks. Just to be clear, I am talking about layering my paint in this way. I am not talking about multiple layers in the toolbar. The 3 most important things to concentrate on when you are attempting this loose painterly style is your value, your edges and your brushwork. Number 1, value, temperature, saturation. Value means how light or dark something is. When dealing with foliage and grassy areas, you'll find a lot of it will be very similar value. If I turn the finished artwork into black and white, you'll see what I mean. Look at the grass area, or perhaps even the panelling on that barn. It's pretty much the same value. So I need to introduce broken colour, temperature shifts and textured brushwork. This will make it look more interesting, more realistic and more painterly. In the barn, I have used warm and cool temperatures together. I have used reds, oranges and blues. Notice how that shift in temperature makes the wood look more interesting. Just remember that on the colour wheel, red is my warmest colour. Moving away from red, it gets less warm. This is what I mean when I talk about temperature. How warm is it or how cool is it? When I look at my red colour picker, this side is very saturated, so my colour is very strong. This side is much more muted, so my colour is less strong. This side is warm, this side is cooler. I can therefore adjust my temperature by moving over to the left side. But bear in mind when you move straight across the horizontal on your colour picker, your value will change too. So for example, here it is cool, but my value is very light. If I move straight across like this, my colour is now much warmer, but it is also much darker. So if you want to switch between warm and cool, as I have done in this way, you will need to move across diagonally like this, so as not to affect your value. Remember that colour wheel and how my colours are getting cooler as I move away from my red. Look at my blue colour picker. I have used very muted blues in the roof area. Blue is a cool colour. There is no warm and cool here, just very saturated and very muted. If I am trying to introduce a note of warmth in that blue, I am not going to be able to do it in the blue colour picker. I am going to have to introduce a warmer colour. So for example, here I have introduced a transparent orange into my blue area. And as the roof moves further away from me and towards the sky, I have laid some transparent orange strokes into this area here. Why am I doing this? Objects take on the colours of what is around them. So I have reflected orange in the roof from the sky. I have reflected green from the grass shadow in my wall area. This broken colour will help give my artwork a much more painterly feel. If I move to my grass area, you will see I have done a similar thing. In this area here, I have a very orangey hue. It's very warm, but I have then broken this colour with accents of yellow and green, and then some slightly darker, more muted greens. But it's all a similar value. Looking at my colour picker, I am moving between orange, yellow and yellow-green. And then within those colours, I am varying my saturation between something very strong in colour and then something a bit more muted. Looking at the hedge at the bottom, I am moving between my orange, yellow and green colour picker again. But this time I am varying both my temperatures, my saturation and my values. For foliage to look realistic and painterly, you must have a mix of temperatures, warm and cool. Colour hues, so saturated to muted, and your values must be correct. Number 2, edges. Paying attention to your edges is very important for achieving something that looks painterly. You will need a mix between hard, soft and lost edges. How you paint that transition is also important. You need to think about what your object is. For example, that barn will have a more definitive edge than the tree. If I were to give my barn roof a soft airbrushed edge, it would not look like a roof. The sort of brush I would use for a harder, more defined edge is different to the sort of brush I would use for a feathered edge. I would use maybe a fine wet liner to create that roof edge, but maybe feathered bristle brush to create the tree. But when you are creating that harder edge, I still want a bit of variation in it. Notice that edge isn't razor sharp. I have used my wet liner on about 40% transparency to pull it about a bit. I have pulled my blue into my red and vice versa. For my lost edge just here, I would use a very soft brush like the mist airbrush. In fact, you can even see some of my misty background that I have left overlapping into my barn. Look at how often I have pulled my edges into each other, giving me a softer edge. My horse is far less defined than my photo. All I have done is pull colours into each other using a feathered bristle brush at various transparencies, just like this. It gives a very painterly effect and helps give the artwork some mood and atmosphere too. Number 3, brushwork. At the start I listed all the different brushes that I used in this artwork. I am switching between these brushes regularly to give contrast to the painting. If I used only one brush, the artwork would look very uniform. Also, there are some limitations with the brushes. For example, the feathered brush doesn't give me large enough strokes that I need for this area down here. So I switched my brush to the oil paint brush for this section here. But I also used a true oil as well. For the highlights, I then switched back to the feathered bristle because it gives me a better mark for the smaller detail. I'm going to take this bottom area as an example of how I laid my paint and talk through it in a bit more detail. I used the oil paint brush on 70% opacity and selected a black orange. I covered the area roughly, letting areas of green show through. I then picked a dark orange and turned my opacity down to about 40%. Using the true oil brush, I dabbed a few areas of paint near the top part of my hedge. Switching back to the oil paint brush, about 50% opacity, I then selected a mid-yellow green and laid paint in vertical strokes, making sure I was leaving darker areas along my horizontal, just like in my photo. Notice at this point my mark making is still quite vertical. Each time I select another colour, I'm going lighter, and the colours are pretty saturated as well. The aim is to start with the dark areas and get lighter until I get to the highlights. The next colour I selected is a light orange at about 60% opacity, then a lighter green and a lighter yellow. The lighter I go, the more opaque my paint is getting. My lightest highlights will be 100% opaque, so I'm just working up to that. Notice at this stage I'm beginning to lay my strokes horizontally and diagonally. It's important to get a bit of variation in your strokes. Don't do them all in the same direction. I have switched back to the feathered bristle brush at this point because my strokes are smaller and more defined. I then add the fence post and try to make the greenery work around it. I am using the fine wet liner and the bristle brush. The fine wet liner will give me more of a definite edge in the top part of the post, but notice how soft the edges are around the middle part and how I have suggested its form at the bottom with a couple of strokes. It's really important to edit your detail and not get caught up in painting every blade of grass or leaf. I am painting the impression of the hedge. Look at how soft my edges are generally. It is just a few highlights that suggest the top of the hedge. I have also painted that post using both blues and oranges. That cool blue of the fence helps balance the cool blue of the barn across the diagonal. I've also introduced oranges down the side where the sunlight would be bending around the post. At this point, I am just going to have a brief word about my layers. The painting has been done on one layer, exactly as an oil painting would be. I did this because I am trying to mimic oil painting as closely as I can. And that is it. That is the finished painting. I hope you've enjoyed today's video and found it useful. Please like and subscribe if you can, and check out my website, Sarah Halliday Art, where you will find examples of my work and also details of online classes that I run. Thank you for watching, and see you for the next one.